The first thing they took from you in the teams was your name. Not formally. Not with paperwork. You just stopped being whatever you were before and became something the unit decided to call you. Usually something that rhymed with your last name, or referenced the stupidest thing you'd done in training, or both. They called Reyes Tortilla for 2 years because he'd panicked during a cold water drill and grabbed a life ring that turned out to be somebody's lunch cooler. They called Morales Cricket because during his first night op he'd stepped on a radio and it chirped like something alive and he'd nearly shot it. They called me nothing. That was the thing nobody talks about when they write their little think pieces about women in special operations, that the silence isn't hostile, exactly. It's just total. Like you stepped into a room where the frequency everyone else communicates on is slightly outside your range, and you can see their mouths moving and you can tell they're saying real words, but there's this thin sheet of plexiglass between you and the meaning of things. My name was Sergeant First Class Dara Okonkwo, 29 years old. 6 years Army Ranger qualified, 2 combat deployments to Afghanistan, 1 to Mali. Proficient in 3 languages, 2 of which were operationally relevant to where we were sitting. IQ somewhere in the range that made the screening psychologist uncomfortable. And I was standing in a Quonset hut in Djibouti in August, sweating through my undershirt, while 8 men who had decided before meeting me that I didn't belong here looked at the map on the wall instead of at me. Chief Petty Officer Hank Dwyer looked at me once. Just the once. Then, he went back to the map. That look was a paragraph long. It said, "I don't know what's in your file, I don't know what general thought this was a good idea, and I don't particularly care about either of those things because what I care about is whether you can keep these men alive, and I don't know you well enough to trust you with that, so until I do, you are furniture." I'd seen that look before. I knew how to wait it out. Mostly. The hut smelled like gun oil and stale coffee and the particular brand of sweat that only happens when men live in close quarters in 110-degree heat for weeks at a time. A complicated smell, not entirely unpleasant if you'd grown up around brothers, which I had. 3 of them. All taller than me. All louder than me. All certain, from the moment I was born, that I was going to do something they couldn't predict. My mother used to say I came out of the womb already looking for the angle. "She's always calculating," she told my oldest brother Emmanuel once, when she thought I was asleep. "That child does not react. She responds." Emmanuel had said, "What's the difference?" She'd said, "About 2 seconds. And, in our family, 2 seconds is everything." I thought about that a lot. In training, mostly. When the cold water closed over my head or when the instructors were yelling things designed to make you quit, I'd count. 1 Mississippi. 2 Mississippi. Let the reaction flush through and out. Then, respond. Standing in that hut, I counted. 1. 2. The briefing was for an intelligence extraction mission in the border region between Ethiopia and Somalia, a patch of geography that existed in a sort of bureaucratic purgatory where nobody's jurisdiction was clean and everyone's patience was thin. A man named Farouk Hassan had been running a financing network out of a compound outside a town called Delo. Not a high-value target by the metrics people use in press releases. No Hollywood kill or capture drama attached to his name. Just a quiet man who moved quiet money that bought loud things. The mission was to get into the compound, pull his hard drives, pull his ledgers if there were physical ones, and get out without letting him know we'd been there. Ideally without letting anyone know we'd been there. Which was the part where I came in. I spoke Somali. Functional Amharic. And I'd spent 8 months embedded with a USAID agricultural mission in the Horn of Africa before my 3rd deployment. 8 months that had not appeared in any of my official records until someone at a desk in Fort Bragg had gone looking for exactly that kind of access. Nobody in this room knew any of that yet. They hadn't asked. Chief Dwyer finished his briefing. He nodded at the mission timeline taped to the board. Questions. A man named Petty Officer 2nd Class Aaron Briggs. They called him Brig, not because of any disciplinary history but because he was built like a small brick building and moved about as fast, raised his hand halfway and said, "Just one." "Who's the +1? He didn't look at me when he said it. He looked at Dwyer. Dwyer said, "Sergeant Okonkwo. She's your linguistic asset and secondary breach." Briggs lowered his hand. He looked at the map. "Copy." That was it. That was the whole conversation. I had been trained not to need acknowledgement. I knew, intellectually, that this was correct protocol, that SEALs don't perform welcome ceremonies, that warmth is not on the mission brief, that functional trust is built on operations and not on handshakes. I knew all of that the way you know the temperature of a stove by looking at it. And I still felt it. The word for it is loneliness, but that's not quite right. It's closer to the feeling you get in a dream when you realize you're speaking a language that isn't yours and everyone around you already knows the ending. I folded my arms. I studied the map. I found 3 things on it immediately that I wanted to flag. I said nothing. Not yet. That night, the night before the mission, I sat outside on an overturned fuel drum and ate an MRE that claimed to be chicken but tasted like the idea someone had once about what chicken might be like. The sky was something ridiculous. That's the only word for a sky in the Horn of Africa at night. Ridiculous. Too many stars, arranged with zero subtlety, like God had decided that understatement was for people with less real estate. My brothers would have taken photographs. Emmanuel would have said something about the cosmos. My brother Kofi, the physicist, would have started explaining stellar magnitude to anyone within earshot. My youngest brother Kwame would have just stood there with his mouth open. I sat there and ate my not chicken and did not think about what was going to happen tomorrow. Footsteps on gravel. The specific pattern of someone who walks like they've been doing it in combat boots for a decade and have made peace with the weight. I didn't turn around. A man sat down on a crate about 4 feet to my left. I heard the crack of a plastic wrapper. He was eating something from his own pocket. He chewed for a while. Then, he said, "Halima Farouk." I turned. The man was the team's intelligence liaison, a lean, quiet Peer 1 named Marcus Webb. They called him Webbs for reasons I hadn't established yet. He had a file folder balanced on his knee and a protein bar in his hand, and he was looking at the sky the same way I had been. "What about her?" I said. "Hassan's daughter. 22. She runs his comms. Not officially. Officially she's a bookkeeper. But she's the one who actually talks to his people in Mogadishu." He tapped the folder. We didn't know that until the last signals package came in this afternoon. Dwyer hasn't seen it yet. I looked at the folder. "Why are you telling me?" Webbs turned his head and looked at me for the first time since he'd sat down. He had a face that had been outdoors for most of its life. "Because you're the only one who's going to be able to talk to her." I thought about that for 2 seconds. She's going to be in the compound. Almost certainly. And she speaks Somali primarily, some Arabic, very limited English. I set down my MRE tray. So the mission brief is incomplete. "The mission brief," Webb said, "is going to need a significant modification before 0400. He handed me the folder. I opened it. Inside was a photograph of a young woman with her father's careful eyes and her own particular wariness, the wariness of someone who has grown up knowing exactly what her family does and has decided to be useful to it rather than destroyed by it. I recognized that wariness. I'd seen it in a mirror. Different context. Same math. "She's not a target," I said. It wasn't a question. "No," Webb said. "But she's not nothing, either." He stood up, crumpled his protein bar wrapper, put it in his pocket because you don't leave trash in the field even when nobody's watching. "Brief updates at 0300, he said. I'd have something figured out by then. He walked back toward the hut. I sat with the photograph. The sky did its ridiculous thing above me and I thought about 2 seconds. About the difference between reacting and responding. About a woman with her father's eyes who didn't know I was coming. I thought, "I see you." Then, I got to work. 0300 came in like they always do in the field. Not announced, not gradual, just suddenly. It's dark and cold and you're more awake than you've been all day because your body knows something is about to happen even when your brain is still catching up. The team assembled in the briefing hut with the particular economy of motion that special operations people develop over time. No excess gestures, nothing wasted, everyone a little quieter than civilians would understand as comfortable. I put the updated brief on the board. I had hand-drawn the addition to the layout. I had written Halima Farouk's name above the communications node in the eastern section of the compound. I had drawn a line connecting her to 3 separate egress complications we hadn't accounted for. Dwyer looked at the board for a long time. Then, he looked at me. "Where'd this come from?" "Webb signals package," I said. "Came in at 1600. You were on a comms call with Sockham." He looked at Webb's. Webbs nodded. Dwyer looked back at the board. His jaw moved in the way jaws move when someone is recalculating without wanting you to see them do it. Briggs said, from the back, "So now we've got a principal and a comms operator. Same compound. That changes the egress window." "It does," I said. "By how much?" "If Halima Farouk is where the signals put her, she's in the eastern wing. That's 40 meters past the primary hard drive location. If she triggers an alert before we're out, we lose our window and we lose it completely." I paused. "She won't trigger an alert." The room looked at me. Not at the map. At me. "Because," Dwyer said, "because I'm going to talk to her." Silence. The specific kind of silence that isn't empty. It's full of things people are deciding not to say out loud. Briggs said, "In Somali." "Yes." "And you think that's going to, what, exactly?" "She's going to just stand down because you asked nicely." I looked at him. He looked back. He wasn't being hostile, I realized. Not exactly. He was asking a real question in the only register he knew how to ask it. "No," I said. "She's going to stand down because she's been waiting for someone to give her a reason to." I tapped Halima's photograph on the board. This woman has been managing her father's communications for 3 years. She has access to everything. She hasn't passed a single piece of intelligence to any foreign service in 3 years. But she also hasn't moved any of the money herself. Hasn't taken any of the operational roles she could have taken. She does her piece and, exactly her piece and, nothing else. I let that sit for a second. That's not loyalty. That's containment. Webbs was looking at the floor. Dwyer was looking at me. "She wants out," I said. "She doesn't know yet that we are the out." The silence changed. I felt it change, the pressure differential, the microscopic shift in the weight of 8 men's attention. Dwyer said, "Modified breach at 0430. Eastern wing added to the route. Okonkwo leads the comms contact." He looked around the room. Questions? Nobody said anything. Then, Briggs said, still looking at the map, "Huh. Not agreement, exactly. Not skepticism either. Something in between that, in my experience, was the closest thing to respect you got on the first night." I breathed out. 1 Mississippi. 2 Mississippi. The desert at 4 in the morning is not dramatic. Nobody tells you that. Movies give you orchestral swells and blue-tinted photography and men with their jaws set like they've been carved from something expensive. The reality is that you're cold, which you weren't expecting because it was 110 degrees 6 hours ago and your body hasn't recalibrated, and your boots are loud on the packed earth no matter how carefully you place them, and the sky is still doing its ridiculous star thing, but you're not looking at it because you're looking at the ground and the shadows and the man 3 meters ahead of you and the man 3 meters to your left. We moved in a staggered column. 2 clicks of open terrain between our insertion point and the compound perimeter. Nomon. Which was the plan. We'd pick the window specifically for the lunar cycle. But no moon also means your eyes are doing the work and your eyes are making deals with your imagination about what the darker shapes in the darkness might be. I controlled my breathing. In through the nose, 4 counts. Hold, 4 counts. Out through the mouth, 4 counts. My first ranger instructor, a terrifying small man from Biloxi, Mississippi who went by Sergeant Speck and had the eyes of something that lived in deep water, had told me, the body doesn't know the difference between excitement and fear. Your job is to pick one and commit to it. I committed to excitement. Mostly. Briggs was on my left. He moved well, quieter than his size suggested, which was a thing you learned about people in this work, that the big ones were often the careful ones because they'd had to learn to be. He hadn't said anything to me since the briefing. Not unfriendly. Just focused. I respected focused. Dwyer was on point. He communicated in hand signals that I'd memorized from the briefing schematic. The team used a slightly modified version of standard signals, Webbs had warned me, because they'd been operating together long enough to develop their own shorthand. I'd memorized the deviations. 3 fingers flat meant hold. 2 fingers curled meant audio threat. Index finger circled meant reposition. At the 1 kilometer mark, Dwyer held up a fist. We stopped. Somewhere in the dark ahead, a generator. The low mechanical cough of something diesel. Compound power. We were close enough to hear it. Dwyer signaled. Spread. We spread. I moved to the right flank with Webbs and a man named Petty Officer First Class Danny Reyes, Totilla, though I was careful not to think of him that way because names like that are relational, earned in context, and I hadn't earned the right to use it yet. Reyes had a face like a question someone hadn't finished asking. He was the one who would cover the primary entrance while Dwyer's element went for the hard drives. My element, me, Webbs, and one additional operator named Hollis, would go east, to Halima. The compound wall was mud brick, pale, almost white in the ambient starlight. 3 meters high with broken glass mortared along the top. Old technique, effective enough, the kind of deterrent that works on people who haven't decided yet whether to come over. We'd decided. Hollis went first. He was the youngest man on the team, 24, with an almost aggressive competence that he wore like a challenge. Everything he did was slightly too good, slightly too deliberate, the way people perform precision when they're still proving something. He got over the wall in 6 seconds. I went second. Webbs came last. On the other side, a courtyard. 3 vehicles. 2 were trucks, the kind of anonymous white pickup that does double duty across this entire region as farm equipment and everything else. The third was a Land Cruiser with a dented front quarter panel that the satellite imagery had already catalogued. A guard. 1 guard. Sitting against the eastern wall of the main structure, head dropped, rifle across his knees. Not asleep. Not quite. The particular stillness of someone who is very tired and has been in that stillness for long enough that waking up feels like more effort than it's worth. Hollis looked at me. I shook my head. Not the guard. Not yet. We moved along the inside of the compound wall. Slow. Deliberate. The generator was louder in here, a good thing, acoustic cover, and somewhere inside the main building a radio was playing something I recognized after a moment as a Somali pop station out of Mogadishu, the kind that plays between midnight and dawn when the regular programming gives up. Second door on the eastern side. Corrugated metal, newer than the rest of the structure. Padlocked on the outside, which meant nobody was inside, or nobody who'd gone in there willingly. I looked at Webbs. He was already pulling the signals readout from the afternoon. He tapped the screen once. The comms equipment they'd tracked was active from this room in the evenings. It would be dormant now. But she'd been using it. And she was somewhere very close. The padlock came off with a tool Hollis had that I hadn't seen before and didn't ask about. The door opened outward. We went in. A room the size of a large closet. 4 screens, 2 keyboards, a satellite uplink antenna cabled through the roof. The floor had a woven mat on it and a pair of sandals placed beside the mat with the particular neatness of someone for whom tidiness is a private rebellion against disorder. The sandals were a woman's size. Webbs was already on the equipment. His hands moved fast, pulling drives, swapping them for clean ones, the kind of exchange that's invisible if someone doesn't know to look and obvious if someone does. I faced the interior door. Hollis was at my shoulder. I held up 1 finger. Just me. He looked at the door. At me. He was 24 and very good at things and not yet quite sure how to handle things that weren't on the mission schematic. I held up the finger again. He stepped back. Half a step. Enough. I tried the interior door. Unlocked. A hallway. 3 meters. Tile floor that clicked under my boots even when I was careful. 1 lamp on the wall, low wattage, the kind that doesn't illuminate so much as it prevents total darkness. At the end of the hallway, light under a door. I stood in front of that door for a moment that was probably 2 seconds and felt about 10 years long. Then, I knocked. Not a tactical knock. Not a breach knock. A knock the way you knock on a door when you need to talk to someone and you've decided that the only thing standing between the current situation and a better one is the quality of the conversation you're about to have. Silence from inside. Then, a voice. Low. Female. In Somali. Who is it? In Somali, I said, someone who is not here to hurt you. A pause. The voice again, less certain of its own steadiness. That's what someone who is here to hurt me would say. I almost smiled. Yes, I said. But someone here to hurt you wouldn't have knocked. Another pause. Longer. How many of you? More than I should admit. Fewer than you'd need to be afraid of. The longest pause yet. Then, my father, is not our concern tonight. He will be your concern if you make noise. I know, I said. That's why I'm asking you not to. The silence after that was a different kind. The kind where someone is doing arithmetic. I waited. The door opened. Halima Farouk was 22 years old and she was wearing a house dress and she had her father's careful eyes and she was holding a phone in one hand, not raised, not pointed at anything, just held, the way you hold something when you haven't decided yet whether it's a weapon or not. She looked at me. I looked at her. She said, in Somali, "You're a soldier." Yes. "You're a woman." Also yes. She looked past me at the hallway. Empty. There are more. Yes. "My father." She stopped herself. I said, "We know what your father does. We know what you do. We know what you don't do." Her grip on the phone changed. Barely. The kind of change you'd miss if you weren't watching for exactly that kind of thing. I said, "The ledgers. The ones from last year. The transfer records you didn't route through the Mogadishu account." Her face didn't move. But her eyes did. "Those records," I said, "put 3 of your father's suppliers in a country where they can't be touched right now. But they also put you in a country where you can be." She said, "You're threatening me." "I'm telling you what's true." "What do you want?" I looked at her for a long 2 seconds. This was the part where things went one way or another and you couldn't plan it, couldn't script it, couldn't train for it in any facility or simulation because the variable was a human being who had been making a specific calculation for 3 years and had arrived at this specific moment and the only question was whether that calculation had been building toward something. "I want to know," I said, "if you're ready to stop." The hallway was very quiet. Through the walls, the generator. Through the walls, the distant radio. Through the walls, somewhere, the weight of everything she'd been holding. She looked down at the phone in her hand. Then, she set it on the table inside the room. "Yes," she said. One word. In Somali. Smaller than it should have been. Heavier than everything. What happened in the next 11 minutes is the kind of thing that gets written as operational prose in a classified debrief and never sounds like what it actually was, which was controlled chaos with a thin coat of professionalism painted over it. Webbs finished the drive extraction. Hollis secured the corridor. Outside, Dwyer's element had completed their pull from the primary office. The guard against the eastern wall had been sedated, not harmed, not permanently inconvenienced, just removed from the equation for long enough. Halima walked with me. She'd put on shoes. She'd picked up one thing from the room, a small photograph the size of a playing card, which she tucked into her dress pocket without looking at it and without explaining it, and I didn't ask. The photograph you take when you're leaving somewhere and you need something to carry that isn't grief. I understood that, too. At the compound wall, Hollis went first. Webb second. Then, Halima. I showed her where to put her feet, and she went over with the particular determined grace of someone who has never done this specific thing before and intends to do it correctly regardless. I went last. On the other side, the desert. Cold. Dark. Ridiculous with stars. Dwyer materialized from the dark to my left. He looked at Halima. Then, at me. I said, very quietly, "She's with us." He looked at her for 1 second. Then, he looked forward, toward the extraction point. "Move," he said. We moved. 2 clicks back through the dark, and I can tell you that it is a strange thing to walk through the desert with a woman who was a stranger 4 hours ago and who is now the most important operational variable in your immediate environment. I kept her between me and Webbs. She walked well, kept pace, didn't stumble, didn't make noise. She was frightened. I could feel it in the precise control of her breathing. She was doing what I did, counting. Managing the body's desire to react by insisting on a response instead. At the kilometer mark, she said, very quietly in Somali, "Is it always like this?" I said, "No. Sometimes it's worse." She made a sound that was almost a laugh. Not quite. Close enough. At the half-kilometer mark, Briggs materialized from a shadow to our right and fell into step beside us without a word. He looked at Halima. Then, forward. Then, at me. He gave a small nod. It was the size of a postage stamp and it meant approximately nothing in the context of everything that had just happened. But it was the first thing that had been directed at me in that compound that wasn't a question or a condition. I filed it away. We reached the extraction point at 05:42. The helicopter came in low and fast, which is the only way helicopters come in when they don't want to be where they are any longer than necessary. It was the most beautiful thing I'd seen in days, not because of what it looked like, but because of what it meant, which was that the next part of this had a floor under it. Halima grabbed my arm when it landed. The rotor wash hit her and she grabbed my arm the way you grab something solid when the world suddenly has too much motion in it. I held still. "It's all right," I said, in Somali. She looked at the helicopter. At me. At the helicopter. Then, she let go of my arm, squared her shoulders, and walked toward it. Inside the helicopter, en route to somewhere I'm not going to specify, 14 people in varying states of exhaustion and alertness sat with the particular silence of people who have done something and are now on the other side of it. Halima sat across from me. She had her hands folded in her lap. She was looking out the small porthole window at the dark. I was looking at the same dark. Briggs leaned across from my left and tapped my knee once with 2 fingers. I looked at him. He handed me a protein bar. I took it. He leaned back. Said nothing. I ate the protein bar. It tasted like chalk and artificial chocolate, and it was the best thing I'd eaten in 36 hours. Dwyer, from the far end of the fuselage, was looking at the debrief documents Webbs had already started organizing. He had his reading glasses on, which made him look like someone's grandfather who was very disappointed in several geopolitical decisions. He didn't look at me. But, at some point in the middle of the flight, between the dark and the gradual grey of a dawn that was coming whether anyone wanted it to or not, he said, to nobody in particular, to the fuselage, to the air, "Haluva brief modification." Nobody answered. That was its own answer. 3 days later, they called me Hawk. Not because of any particular action in the compound, or at least, not because of one specific thing. Webbs told me later, over terrible coffee in the debrief facility in Djibouti, that it had been Briggs who'd said it first. Apparently what he'd actually said was, "She sees things from up high and, then, she lands on them." And that was Briggs being almost poetic, which nobody on the team had apparently anticipated, so the name stuck partially out of surprise. I didn't find out until Reyes used it during a planning session on the 4th day. He'd said, "Hawk, you got eyes on the logistics piece." And I'd looked up, and he was looking at me, and I'd said, "Yeah." And that was it. That was the whole ceremony. What you need to understand about special operations teams is that they are not families in the way that word gets used in movies. Warm, chosen, emotionally demonstrative. They are more like old machinery that's been running together for long enough that the individual parts have worn grooves into each other. The gear meshes. It doesn't hug. What I got from that team was not warmth. What I got was something better. I got the assumption of competence. That's the thing that people who have never been on the wrong side of professional skepticism can't quite understand, that the thing you're fighting for isn't recognition. It's just to be the default hypothesis. To have someone hand you a problem and step back, the way you hand a tool to a craftsperson, without narrating how the tool works. Briggs started doing that on day 2. He put a signals readout in front of me at breakfast, 600 hours, bad lighting, both of us pre-coffee, and said, "What are you seeing?" No preamble. No testing. Just the question. I looked at it. I told him what I saw. He nodded, folded the printout, ate his eggs. Day 3. Dwyer included me in the operational planning cycle without being asked. Not symbolically, actually pulled up a chair and said, "Walk me through the linguistic map of the network. Who talks to whom in what language and what does that tell us about the power structure?" I walked him through it. It took 40 minutes. He asked 3 questions, all of them good. At the end he said, "That's useful." In Dwyer's vocabulary, useful is what other people mean when they say exceptional. I'd learned that in 3 days of watching him talk to his own team. Useful was the highest register. Good was solid. Fine was barely passing. Anything below fine didn't get a word, just a silence with a specific shape. I was useful. I filed that away, too. Halima Farouk was in a safe house 17 kilometers from where we were operating. I know this because I visited twice, with an escort who was professional enough to pretend he wasn't there. The first visit was operational. There was more to pull from her memory than her hard drives had contained, and she'd been cooperative in the way that people are cooperative when they've made a decision and have committed to it completely. She answered every question. She drew diagrams from memory. She named names in the particular flat tone of someone who has already done the emotional work of the naming and arrived on the other side of it. The second visit was not operational. Not officially. I went because I wanted to. She was sitting by a window that had been covered with a semi-translucent screen. Light came through but no direct sightline from outside. She'd been given books. 3 of them were in Somali, 1 in Arabic. She was reading the Arabic one, which seemed like a choice. I sat across from her. For a while neither of us said anything. Then, she said, in Somali, the photograph I took. Yes. It is my mother. She died when I was 11. I said nothing. My father, she stopped. Started again. He became what he became after. I am not making an excuse. I am explaining the order of things. I understand the order of things, I said. She looked at me. Do you? My father, I said, was not a bad man. He was a man who loved his children very much and had very specific ideas about what that love should look like. And some of those ideas were, I thought about the right word, costly. She considered this. And you became a soldier. I became someone who could make her own decisions about what to do with costs. She was quiet for a moment. Then, is that what this is? You made a decision. Yes. And me. I looked at her. You made one too. She looked at the covered window. The light came through soft and indirect, the kind of light that doesn't commit to anything. She said, I don't know what I'm supposed to do now. Nobody knows that, I said. Most people just figure it out one day at a time. She looked at me in a way that suggested she'd expected something more useful from someone in my line of work. I said, You're 22. You speak 3 languages. You understand network finance at a level that most analysts with advanced degrees don't. And you made the right decision in a very hard moment. She said, So did you. I sat with that for a second. Yes, I said. I suppose I did. The mission debrief was held on day 5, in a room with air conditioning that worked and chairs that didn't, which was a typical allocation of resources. Everyone was there, the whole team, plus liaison officers from 2 other agencies whose names I didn't ask and wasn't told. Dwyer ran the brief. Webbs handled the technical timeline. At one point, Dwyer got to the compound breach and the modification to the eastern wing. He described it clinically. Objective, approach, contact protocol. When he got to the Halima Farouk element, he said, linguistic contact was initiated by Sergeant Okonkwo. Assets successfully extracted with full voluntary cooperation. One of the liaison officers said, How'd she get her to cooperate? Dwyer looked at the officer. Then, at me. I said, I asked. The liaison officer blinked. You asked. I asked the right thing, I said. In the right language. At the right moment. The officer wrote something down. I have no idea what he wrote. Whatever it was probably less accurate than the actual version, which is that I had looked at a woman I'd never met, in a building I'd broken into, in the dark, and had decided to treat her like someone who was capable of choosing, and she had turned out to be exactly that. The timeline moved forward. At the end of the debrief, when the liaison officers had left and it was just the team again, Dwyer said, We are being asked to submit a recommendation for a follow-on operation in the same network. Different geography. Similar parameters. He looked around the room. Same team, he said. Different composition. He was looking at the wall. At the map on the wall. At, specifically, the region labeled in red that was the next problem. He said, recommendations for addition to the composition. Briggs said, without looking up from his coffee, Hawk. Nobody disputed it. Dwyer wrote something on his pad. That night, my last night in Djibouti before I flew back to Fort Bragg to start whatever the paperwork circus of next was going to be, I sat on the same fuel drum I'd sat on when Webbs had brought me the folder with Halima's photograph in it. The sky was still ridiculous. I thought about what my mother had said. About 2 seconds. About the difference between reaction and response. I thought about Halima on the helicopter, squaring her shoulders and walking toward the noise and the motion because she'd already made her decision and she was going to see it through. I thought about Briggs and his postage stamp nod and his protein bar. I thought about Dwyer saying useful like it was a confession. I thought about the sound of my name, Hawk, said casually and, without ceremony in the middle of a planning session like it had always been there, like it had been waiting in that syllable for me to show up and claim it. War is not what they show you. I want to say that clearly, to whoever is reading this or hearing this or carrying it forward in whatever way things get carried. It is not dramatic in the ways movies require. It is dramatic in smaller, stranger ways. It is the cold that surprises you after the heat. It is the sound of a generator through a mud brick wall. It is a woman setting down a phone she'd been holding like a question and answering it with her hands. It is a name that isn't yours becoming yours. It is 8 men who had decided before meeting you that you were furniture discovering, incrementally, that they were wrong, not because you proved them wrong in one dramatic gesture, but because you kept being right in the accumulated, patient, daily way that is the only way anything actually changes. I was not the first woman to go over a wall in the dark in a place nobody on the news could find on a map. I will not be the last. The women who came before me carried things I benefited from. The women who come after me will benefit from things I carried. That's the only tradition that matters in any of this, the one where you take whatever was handed to you and move it forward and hope the next person's load is slightly lighter for it. Slightly. Not perfectly. Not without cost. Just slightly. I think about Halima. I think about the photograph in her pocket. Her mother's face, the size of a playing card, carried out of a compound in the dark towards something that had no name yet but was at least, at the absolute minimum, not what it had been before. I think, me too. I sat on the fuel drum until the stars started to lose their absurdity to the approach of dawn. Then, I went inside and packed my bag. I packed it the way I always pack, everything in its place, nothing left behind, the weight distributed so you can carry it for as long as you have to without it breaking anything permanent. Out in the main room, someone had left the coffee on. I poured a cup. Briggs came in from somewhere, from wherever Briggs came from, which I had not yet established, and poured his own cup and leaned against the opposite counter. We drank coffee in the pre-dawn quiet. After a while he said, "Good op." I said, "Yeah." He said, "You coming back for the next one?" I looked at him. He was looking at his coffee cup. "Yes," I said. He nodded. "Drank." "Good," he said. That was it. The whole thing. That was the entire conversation about everything that had happened, everything I'd navigated, everything I'd proven in the dark over a period of 96 hours in one of the more unremarkable corners of the world. Good. 2 syllables. Everything. The flight back to Fort Bragg was 11 hours with a layover in Germany. I slept for 6 of those hours, which was 4 more than I'd had in the previous 3 days combined, and my dreams were not about the compound or the mission or any of the things you'd expect. I dreamed about my brothers, Emmanuel and Kofi and Kwame, standing in the backyard of our parents' house in Cincinnati, all 3 of them taller than me, all 3 of them loud, all 3 of them looking up at a night sky that was not ridiculous in the way Djibouti is ridiculous but was its own thing, its own particular Cincinnati configuration of stars. In the dream, Kwame pointed up and said, "There." I looked. He said, "That one." And I saw it, whatever he was pointing at, and I recognized it, and I woke up before I could name it, and the plane was somewhere over the Atlantic, and through the small oval window the sky was the particular grey blue of high altitude before sunrise. I looked at it for a while. Then I got out my notebook. I wrote, "They called me nothing," and then they called me Hawk. I wrote, "She set down the phone." I wrote, "Good." I closed the notebook. Below the plane, the Atlantic was dark and enormous and going on for a long time in every direction, which is a thing that is always true about the Atlantic and is also, I've found, a thing that is always true about whatever comes next. It goes on for a long time. And then, you're on the other side of it. And you figure out, one day at a time, what to do from there. For the women who went first. For the ones who come after. And for anyone who has ever counted to 2 and chosen response over reaction.